Yo, put a robot in a hoodie and this is what you get. He is moving like the best of them up on that stage. I mean, tell me that doesn't look more real than Humanoids last year by like 100-fold. I don't know if you saw this Netflix versus Paramount parody, but it is the battle royale with all of the Warner Brother properties sitting in the stands wondering where they are going to end up. Look at that. Jennifer Aniston from Friends and Batman. Everything's a cinematic universe now. Picard and Worf are in there if you look close. Dumbledore versus Superman. Who would you bet on? In a world where I can't really tell what's a joke as a business model because it sounds like it would make money and what isn't anymore, there's a scooter company saying that their business strategy is to get hit by a Waymo and sue, but not to create the accident, just drive carefully and wait for the algorithm to make a mistake, and they worked out the mathematical probabilities.
We want to get hit by a Waymo. We're California's biggest electric moped company, and we need money for more mopeds. A settlement with Waymo is our business strategy.
So we're going to talk about some new evidence that reveals a viral hypothesis for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. No, seriously, it might have been hepatitis C all along. We're going to talk about Spatia, video generation with updatable spatial memory. Yeah, we're talking long horizon, spatially consistent video generation. Imagine you follow that elephant for hours. If you're wondering what it is in the modern world that makes it seem like everybody has an immune system problem now, more evidence that it might be air pollution. But not just fighting it, like turning your immune system against you permanently. And we're going to talk about the idea that there might be a third path to explain consciousness, biological computationalism. I'm going to share a podcast. I would love it if you guys would watch it so that you can maybe bring me a comment or like tell me in my Patreon if this is real and what it means. Like there's this theory that gravity could just be rising entropy. And I've listened to this podcast twice now, and it's blowing my mind. I always thought there was something sort of special about heat, like heat and cool. But could that actually explain gravity? I don't know. Maybe. But first, do you mind pressing the hype button on YouTube right now? So if you're on the mobile app, go to the comments and swipe to the left. If the video's posted within the 7 days of its launch, you might see a hype button. That is, if you haven't already used the only 3 that you get each week. Either way, back to the stuff. And by stuff, I mean this guy. This is a robot dancing musician, rapper looking guy. You know, at first I was like, maybe this is a little person or something dancing around. But no, on closer inspection, this is the humanoid robot that we have seen dancing and boxing and fighting a lot in the last couple weeks. And you can imagine 10 of those flying V formation being the most incredibly looking, perfectly synced dancers of all time. Backing up every major singer coming soon. Unitree robots. So I feel like there was so many cinematic crossovers in 2024 that 2025 just became a mess. But when I think about 2026, and AI, it is the content creators taking every IP that existed from all times. It does not matter if it is Sherlock Holmes, if it is Calvin and Hobbes, if it is Batman, Game of Thrones, The Friends, Matrix, Superman, Harley Quinn, and that much IP that many people across the world know, coming together in unique and interesting ways, will define the type of AI content I think that goes incredibly viral next year. Now, I do think AI is going to have all sorts of actual brands that come out of nowhere, but next year will be the year those seeds are planted. But the mainstream stuff getting ultra crossed over, like the deal Sora has with Disney, I think that is going to be kind of the key big moves that we're going to see. Look at Optimus Prime right behind SpongeBob. It's funny how it feels like Warner Brothers has the biggest IP out of everybody fighting, but like they're the smaller ones. Just goes to show you what a profit machine Netflix has been. That subscription service, man, that's where the money is. All right, tell me what you think about this idea. Supposedly generated by Gemini, actually makes kind of financial sense, but it's also just so against the grain that it shouldn't exist. I'll let them explain.
A settlement with Waymo is our business strategy. We ran the numbers and we think we need 100 mopeds out there to ensure a collision. We're deploying them now. Our lawyer told us we can't try to instigate a crash or create a dangerous situation, but we can deploy a bunch of mopeds with cameras on them and have them go about their day until probability does the rest.
So if you remember last month, there was that guy who bought up all of a not particularly rare kind of Pokemon card, and then he showed that he had possession of them all, and then just took them off the market. He, like, in theory, the ChatGPT was saying, like, well, he could burn them, and then the, scarcity would be very small. There'd only be like a few left, and the value would go through the roof. So, ways to make money that are truly non-traditional is something it feels like this AI era is starting to hit upon. So look for 2026 to be full of crazy business models. I don't even know if that Waymo thing it's probably not real. It's probably a joke, but it just kind of show like, well, like when you think not like a human and you think like an LLM, that is, I guess a viable business strategy. And it's hard to argue with it from strictly a business point of view. It's all a moral, emotional, respectable kind of breaking that it does. All right, next up, let's go talk about the 5 rules that you need in life. This is Carl Jung, but written by Andy Murphy. All right, let's talk about these 5 rules. So number 1, befriend your shadow. This means noticing and accepting the parts of yourself you usually ignore or reject. So that'd be something like a fear or habit, some kind of a blind spot. I think this is a little bit like meditation, like step back and sort of notice things about you and don't pretend that those parts don't exist. Don't protect your ego, acknowledge them so that they don't shape your life, even if you're not proud of them or they're bad. Second, follow meaning, not pleasure. So rather than chasing short-term or fun, easy comforts, aim for what genuinely matters in the long run. Building something over time, finding a partner, doing something that seems like it's changing the world, something meaningful, building a community, something like that doesn't just kind of involve you feeling good, because those feelings are always fleeting. But you can enjoy the journey if you're going somewhere bigger. Number 3 is become whole, not perfect. So the goal isn't flawlessness. It's integrating all parts of yourself, strengths and weaknesses alike, so that you live more authentically and less in conflict with yourself. Because you have to imagine anybody who thinks they're kind of perfect or is striving for perfection, to do that, you have to kind of ignore and not integrate all your parts. Like, we all know that we're just full of flaws and like pros and cons, but they come together to make a whole. So just accept all of the pieces as a whole instead of individually saying like, I just hate that part about me. Be like, okay, as a whole, this is the person I am, and here's the dings and scars and stitches that define me as who I am as a whole, and then move towards the whole that goes towards your bigger goals. Number 4, get to know your persona. Your persona is the social face that you show others, and by understanding how it differs from your true self, you can stop performing for the approval of others and start showing up more honestly. And then number 5 is all about putting it all together. So integrate your opposites. So life has tensions like logic and emotion, or independence and connection. And instead of choosing one side, bring them together in a balanced way. So whatever you're the best at is probably also your weakness. That tool that you use to succeed in life, to make money, to find your partner, that same tool, it's probably overused in some cases and it's not helping you. Most of the time it's worth using, but knowing when to turn it off, when to bring in another tool, that's the secret balance to life. I feel like that's the sauce. Okay, so this article is saying that there's a lot of modern online platforms that stopped being about real communication and slowly turned into entertainment systems. And I totally feel that way. Like, Facebook was supposed to be this connection tool, and so was Instagram, and then short form came along, and now, YouTube went from long form to short form, and everything that was text is sort of also video. And then the TikTok algorithm, which was just like the most massive dump of dopamine ever, just owned us all, right? And just everything went in that direction. So he talks about how tools were once meant to reliably send messages between people and now focus on feeds and likes and endless scrolling. And instead of making sure the messages arrive and conversations continue, these platforms prioritize what keeps people watching and reacting. Now, I'd be kind of curious how much do you guys still use email? Like, emails always seemed like one of the worst ways to communicate, and there's something really weird about like reply all and then sometimes forward, but it's sometimes on the same thread and it's got branches that you just kind of need to know, or they group together. So older tools like email or RSS, they still work pretty well for communication, but they feel so boring compared to today's flashy, attention-driven apps. What do you think about Slack? One time it was described as Twitter for the workplace, and I was like, yeah, kinda. That's a tool that seems like it works pretty good for groups. But just the key idea is that he's arguing we didn't accidentally lose communication, we just traded it subtly and slowly for entertainment. And if you follow that out, it affects friendships, work, politics, and even trust itself. Our main tools that were designed for talking to each other are now meant to entertain us instead of helping us truly talk, connect, and actually staying connected is harder than ever. All right, so here's another wild one. I am convinced that when AI finally gets this whole virome figured out and we start comparing it to the genomes and the way the body works, we're going to find such a weird connection between the world of viruses and the human body and all of the disorders and mental states and stomach issues people have had. And there is now new evidence that revives a viral hypothesis for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Kid you not, it would be the virus hepatitis C, a theory that was first proposed over a decade ago. And now these new recent studies, especially one led by researchers at Johns Hopkins, using brain tissue, have found viral genetic material, particularly that of hepatitis C, the HCV RNA virus, in the brain fluid producing lining of people who have schizophrenia and bipolar disorder at higher rates than in controls. So the work used advanced sequencing to screen for thousands of viruses and then confirmed that HCV was significantly more likely to be presented in these groups and in associated health records. I don't know, what do you think? Although the virus wasn't found deep inside the brain tissue, its presence in the lining was associated with changes in gene activity in key brain regions. So it's not like an open shut case, but it is new evidence to look at, and it changes and messes with long-standing viral hypotheses of several mental illnesses. But if schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, if they're a virus, are they contagious? Like, what parts of the world are the virus in? Is it the kind of virus that lands in the lung or the eyes better? There's just so many more questions. And also, viruses tend to have genes that can be made for them, more than many other things. So maybe there will be a vaccine one day for schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. I mean, that would be wild. I don't think I envisioned a near future where maybe an RNA vaccine comes out. Next up, let's talk about Spatia, right? Probably like splatter or like Spatia. I don't know how you'd say it, but this is a video generation with updatable spatial memory. So think about memory that we use in the context of LLMs to kind of learn about us over time, long-term memory, like the way the human brain works, like when you're sleeping, short-term to long-term. This isn't that much different, but it's for actual 3D generation. So Spatia is a cutting-edge video generation model that uses an updatable spatial memory to improve long-range consistency in generated video. So instead of just generalizing frames independently, like most of the models do to try to preserve like the world that they're in and that kind of works a little bit. Like we've seen Genie and Veo do some of that. But in this case, it's actually building and preserving a 3D scene point cloud that acts as a persistent memory. So this is a three-dimensional memory that it can use to kind of know how wide a hallway should be or how solid a wall should be. And during generation, this spatial memory guides the model to produce videos that maintain realistic motion. So spatial coherence and geometry over long-term horizons. I think this is pretty neat. Memory of three-dimensional spaces, like that seems like a huge win to me. This seems like it's more like the foundation of a world model, that's something that replaces LLMs and becomes more than multimodal would have. And this system is also built to disentangle static scene components from the dynamic elements. That means it lets users control camera motion and interact with the generated content in a geometrically grounded way. So yeah, persistent 3D spatial memory. All right, next up, you ready to talk about a third path to explaining consciousness? This one's going to be a fun one. So biological computationalism, what is it? What does it mean? Is that where consciousness comes from? Here's an arrow going up and to the right and consciousness up here. So scientists are proposing a new way to think about the consciousness that arises in brains. Traditionally, researchers have argued that the minds of is either like software running on hardware, so they call that computational functionalism, or that consciousness is inherently tied to the organic body of the living brain, biological naturalism. All right, computational functionalism, biological naturalism. Spectrum, you got to pick where you are in the spectrum. But nope, here comes a third dimension, a third idea. And this new proposal is called biological computationalism. So get rid of the naturalism after biological, get rid of the functionalism after computational, and put the computation and the biological together. Biological computationalism. I like it, I guess. But my opinion aside, this is a middle path. It suggests that the brain does compute, but not in the abstract digital way that we think of computers computing. Instead, brain computation is deeply physical. It involves this hybrid, discrete, and continuous process across many scales. With energy use and body constraints shaping how information is processed, in this view, the computation isn't separate from the physical structure of the brain. It literally is the structure. And understanding consciousness means widening how we define computation itself. This could change how scientists think about and build truly mind-like artificial systems. Let me know your thought in the comment. This is kind of interesting. So because replicating consciousness might require a new kind of physical architecture, not just better software, it kind of means there might be a cap to how much we can scale this sort of compute that everybody's putting $1 trillion into right now, and it would need to be biological. That does align with some of the people Wes and I have been doing podcasts with who have said, basically as long as it's in silicon, no way, even if it's biological but not in a human body, could be conscious. But the interesting insight here is rather than treating the brain's computing as something abstract that can only run on machines, biological computationalism says that computation in brains is inseparable from living physical processes. And that reframes the whole quest for artificial consciousness. All right, next up, something else you might not be that consciously aware of is the air quality in the room that you're in right now. So studyfinds.org published this. Is air pollution training your immune system to turn against you? All right, so we're focusing on little particles in the air of pollution. We're going to use PM25 when I'm talking about this, but what it means is that's the kind of particles, the pollution particles that are so small you can't see them because they're approximately 30 times smaller than a human hair. So you get a lot of these PM2.5 particles from things like car exhaust, wildfires, factories, even burning wood or gas. And because they're so small, they don't just stay in your nose or throat when you breathe them in. They go deep into your lungs, and they can enter your bloodstream. Air pollution, especially long-term exposure to fine particles like these PM2.5s, may not only harm lungs and heart, but also be subtly reshaping the immune system in ways that could raise the risk of autoimmune diseases. Now, there's a huge slope up and to the right on autoimmune diseases in the modern world, and research is showing that people living in areas with these higher levels of PM2.5s tend to have elevated anti-nuclear antibodies. These are early markers that are often seen before autoimmune conditions develop, which suggests chronic pollution exposure might be training our immune system towards self-harm, harmful self-reactivity rather than protection. When your immune system stops protecting you and works against you, it's just bad news. Yeah, so next time you're breathing something like that, remember, scientists think these tiny particles from pollution can get into the bloodstream and trigger that inflammation. All right, and finally, I wanted to leave you with a podcast you might want to check out. So Quanta Magazine posts podcasts and blogs. I think it's maybe my favorite source, like top 5 sources for just interesting stuff. And this one, December 23rd, ICYMI, Is Gravity Just Rising? Entropy is one that I feel is resonating with me, and I'm going to listen to maybe a third time when I go to bed tonight. This concept is called entropic gravity. I Tell me if you've heard of this before. You can imagine space full of these tiny little informational bits that describe where matter is and how it can move. Entropic gravity is the idea that gravity might not be a fundamental force like electricity, and this might be why everybody's had so much trouble unifying quantum mechanics and gravity and like the big and the small. But instead, what it could be is something that appears naturally because the universe always tends towards more disorder. More disorder means higher entropy. So here's a simple way to picture it. Think of placing a heavy ball on a soft mattress or on a trampoline. You've probably seen something like this to describe gravity before. The mattress sinks around the ball. Now picture smaller marbles nearby rolling towards the heavy ball. They roll towards the heavy ball not because the mattress is pulling them, but because the shape of the mattress guides them there. In entropic gravity, space works a little more like that mattress, where you place matter in space and it changes the information in a natural way where entropy wants to increase. Okay, this seems like such a simple idea. In the podcast, you'll hear him talk about how there's quantum spin, and you can imagine sort of like a billiard ball with an arrow. And when they're all in random directions, you kind of have the most entropy. When they're all sort of facing the same direction, like a magnet that might pull a bunch of filings in a certain direction, they become more unified, right? There's less disorder now. And maybe that is what makes gravity sort of yank and pull on matter. And I was like, that is such a different way to think about it, and maybe kind of plausible, or at least worth looking into. Objects would move in the direction that increases entropy most easily, which looks exactly like gravity to us. So if gravity is entropy, it's like, that's crazy. So another analogy would be heat spreading in a room. Nobody forces the heat to spread. It simply does that because it's the most natural state. Entropic gravity would say that it works in the same way. Things fall towards each other because that is the most natural, most efficient arrangement of information in the universe. Scientists are still debating this idea, and now we can too, in the comments below. While you're there, hit the hype button. That is the YouTube button that you will find on the YouTube app on your iPhone or Android. And I will see you guys in the next video.